created for this very purpose. Thank God.
Well, I guess. What's that? So, you certainly, you certainly should be recognized for what you do if you're a great Torah scholar, but you don't wear it. You don't wear a badge that says, "I am a great Torah scholar." That some humility should come with it, because it's expected of you. It's sort of like saying, it's like wearing a badge saying, "I haven't robbed anybody today." You know?
Yeah, well,
It's expected that you don't rob anybody today or any day. So you don't want to get a ton of credit for it, because you're going to get credit for it anyway. Because in the previous paragraph, it says you have acquired eternal life. So, and then people will know anyway that because what you're doing is that you are giving, you're teaching others if you are a Torah scholar.
What does it mean?
Sorry?
If you learn a lot of Torah, don't hold this for yourself, share this with the other, in a simple English.
Well, so you're reading it more from the Hebrew. So the Hebrew says in Lamadata Torah Harbe, if you study a lot of Torah,
don't hold it for yourself.
Al tachazik tova liatzmecha. You're reading it. There's a bunch of ways of reading it. You're doing one of the readings that some of the translators have given it. That that if you don't share it, what good is it, right? What good is it if I'm studying at home and I haven't and I don't get a chance to tell anybody else of it? That's but this interpretation, it says. The English is the one that I think the majority looks at it, is to take no special credit for it, because it's expected of you anyway, that you really, that's the level that we're asking for of you, is that we should all study Torah. So I'm going to skip over to number 13, because I think this has got a little bit more in it than we might like. So we're on page 262, and he is still Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. And Yochanan ben Zakkai, if you can see on the bottom of 261, has 5 top disciples. He doesn't just have 5 disciples. He has 5 top disciples that made a great image, a great, what's the word I want? He made an impression, that's the word I want, on the Torah world. Rabbi Elazar ben Hyrcanus, who never lost a drop of what he learned. Rabbi Yeshua, who's happy as should be his mother who gave birth to him. Rabbi Yosei HaKohen, who's the saintly person, and Rabbi Shimon ben Netanel, a pious person, and the last one is Elazar ben Arach, an ever-flowing fountain. So what's the difference between a well that never loses a drop and an ever-flowing fountain? The well can run dry, but an ever-flowing fountain that never stops is even better. So if you look at the top of page 262, if all the scholars of Israel were on one scale of a balance, and Elazar ben Hyrcanus was in the other, that was the plastered well that never loses a drop, he would outweigh them all. But Rabbi Abba Shaul said, you know what, even if you added Rabbi Elazar ben Hyrcanus on one side, and you had Elazar ben Arach, so there's Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, they sound similar, but the first one's Eliezer, and the last one is Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, the ever-flowing fountain. he would balance them all out. Again, a bit of hyperbole, a bit of overstatement, but you know, you'll see why he comes to that conclusion. So we're at page 262, and we'll have Steve read number 13.
He posed this question to his disciples: "Look about you and tell me, which is the way in life to which one should cleave?" Rabbi Eliezer said, "A generous eye." Rabbi Yeshua said, "A good colleague." Rabbi Yosef said, "A good neighbor." Rabbi Shimon said, "Foresight." Rabbi Elazar said, "A generous heart." Said he to them, "I prefer the answer of Elazar ben Arak, for his view includes all of yours."
So this is why he loved this disciple of his more than the others. None of these are bad things. These are all the things that we should aspire to. A generous eye, a good colleague, that's a chaver, that is a friend, but also every time you hear chaver, think also the possibility of your study partner. So a good colleague is extraordinarily valuable. Shachen ra is your next door neighbor. The worst thing you need is a dispute with your neighbor, who throws the clippings from his grass clippings over on your side, so that you should clean it up.
You see, in Israel, if you live in the second floor,
yeah,
you throw the seat from the down, or no garbage, you throw from up down.
That's charming. Remind me that I should just, if God should grant me that I should live in Israel, that I get a house and not an apartment where someone can be throwing stuff. Rabbi Shimon said, "Haroa et hanolad." If you read the little letters at the bottom of the page, one who sees the consequences of his deeds. Haroa et hanolad. Noah is like a newborn. If you can see what you'll do, because the worst thing that one of the most wonderful things that you can do is say, if I did this, will this have a positive effect after all or not? And then finally, Rabbi Elazar said, a generous heart. Now, in rabbinic literature, even though you think a heart is your emotions, they don't use the word moach, your brain. And so your heart also, when they talk about a generous heart, it's also a very generous brain, something that can see everything. So now you can see that that having all these things is really, really wonderful. But the teacher, Rabbi Hillel, says, this is Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says that this is all the same thing. A generous eye, a good colleague, a good neighbor, seeing into the future, and a generous brain and a generous heart are all pretty much the same thing. So with Rabbi Elazar, basically, why is he worth all the others? Because his opinion includes everything that was already said. All right, someone else want to read? Please.
Which one?
14.
Rabbi Yochanan continued, "Look about you and tell me, which is the way in life that one should avoid?" Rabbi Elazar said, "The writing eye." Rabbi Yosef said, "An evil colleague." Rabbi Yosef said, "An evil neighbor." Rabbi Shimon said, "One who borrows and doesn't repay." The borrow from a person is like borrowing from God, as it is said, "The wicked borrows and does not repay, but the righteous one deals graciously and gives." Rabbi Yehuda said,
Begrudging heart.
begrudging heart.
All right.
Don't hold a grudge. That's what it is.
Yeah.
No.
I think that's one of the. But it's just someone that, and again, it finishes. I prefer the answer of Elazar ben Aruch because his view includes all of yours. If you have a bad heart, you have a bad eye, you're going to be a bad neighbor, you're going to be a bad colleague. Now, if you look at the previous paragraph, it says, Rabbi Eliezer said a generous eye is something to...
So he said the opposite.
Yeah, but let's...
But they didn't fault them, just simply one.
But when you get to Rabbi Shimon, it's a little bit different. So that I think that's where you were leading me. A generous eye is a good thing, a begrudging eye is a bad thing. A good colleague is a good thing, a evil colleague is the bad thing. A good neighbor versus an evil neighbor. But Rabbi Shimon, how do you make foresight as a good thing, and the opposite of it is someone who borrows and doesn't repay? This is where it looks a little bit different. Does somebody have an interpretation that can turn Rabbi Shimon's good news, bad news version into something that actually follows from the other? Yeah.
Because you're losing track of your finances. You're living beyond your means somehow. If you need to borrow, and so you don't have any foresight. You're not planning ahead.
All right.
I would say, I also, borrowing, when someone borrows from someone, the person who's lending,
Yeah.
the idea is not to, I think what he's getting at is the idea is not to lend anyway. Just give it. Then there's no, if you give it with a gracious heart, you just give, then there's no tie to create bitterness because it's done. I gave it to you, you can have it, and that's it. You don't owe me anything. Better to give than to lend.
Okay. So I'm not sure that the line in Shakespeare, neither a borrower nor a lender be, was advocating giving it away, but no. So anybody else have an interpretation that makes Rabbi Shimon's positive and negative actually follow from each other? Rabbi Shimon says foresight, which means that you can see the consequences of what you do, hint, hint. And the bad version of it is you borrow money and you don't give it back.
But if you don't hold grudges, you don't want your money back.
That's right.
All right, but let me look at it. Let me look at it a little bit differently, and I think this is an interpretation. Not the nice thing about Pirkei Avot is that you don't know what happened to these rabbis that they came up with these laws or these concepts. So I'm going to say that foresight, I can haroa et hanoat, I can see the consequences of what I do. That's a good thing. So if you borrow money from me, and I say I'll give this to you, but by the end of the month I got to pay my rent, so I need that money back by the end of the month. You see the consequences of what it will do. If you don't see the consequences of what you're going to do, you're going to take that money from me. You're not going to give it back, and what happens to me? I can't pay my rent on the first of the month when it comes due, and my landlord doesn't have such a nice disposition. So if you don't care what happens to me, then that is the opposite of the person who can see the consequences of what he does. So that's an interpretation of how these two things are actually the opposite of each other.
Isn't that also poor foresight on the giver as well? Because you shouldn't.
The giver maybe can't. I'm not in a position that I could give away my money, and
You're in a position to borrow to someone money. We understand that it's coming back.
I tell you, this is I gotta live on this money. I got an electric bill to pay, all this other stuff, and so I don't want my lights cut off. You don't want my lights cut off. Make sure I have my money back by the first of the month. So that's how Rabbi Shimon's positive sees the consequences of what he does, versus the bad person who says, who knows, we all could be, a meteorite could hit us and we could all be wiped out. I'm not going to worry about what happens in August because I don't know, I don't know what's going to happen. Maybe we'll all get abducted by aliens. I don't know, So that's the kind of person who's very glib about the future.
So you have something for
So that's why, and then finally, Elazar ben Arach, the one with the begrudging heart, has the evil eye, the evil colleague. He serves as an evil neighbor. He borrows without giving back. So these are all the same thing.
If you go to 13, the
13.
the same Rabbi Shimon אומר, רואה את הנולד, the one that see. And this is, I think, was it is basing here about borrowing money to someone.
Steve?
Does it say anything about when the person disappoints you after you lent them money, expecting it back? Is there any commentary about how one should behave in that circumstance?
No.
Doesn't say here anything about.
Nothing here. Nothing here.
But what grudges are doing here? Is it a forgiveness? Is it about the most important part? As he says, that your heart doesn't have to hold grudges, right?
So it says lev ra in the Hebrew, which is a bad heart, a bad, an evil heart. And so they made it smaller. It's not really what the Hebrew says, a begrudging heart. That's an interpretation. It's just somebody who has evil in his heart. That's a terrible thing. So what do they want us to do? None of us think of ourselves as being evil. But if you look at what you do, this is just a way of saying to ourselves, look at what you do. See if you haven't been a good colleague, if you haven't looked upon things in a positive way. We're supposed to look at what happens, but sever panim yafa, and you try to see the good in things. And so what it's telling us to do is just examine, to look at what you do and be careful, because there are times that we approach some of these negatives, and after a while you get yourself so used to doing the negative that you escalate a little bit. So look at what you do. We're supposed to, very soon we're going to be coming into the pre-high holidays period. This is the part of the year where we're going to start getting ready for the high holidays. And how do you get yourself ready for the high holidays? You don't show up on Rosh Hashanah and say, now I got to start thinking about what I've done. We actually have that whole month of Elul beforehand, that you look at what you've been doing for the year and say, how can I do better? And this is an example of how I can do better. So if you remember when I first started this a few months ago, there was, you start reading Pirkei Avot between Passover and Shavuot, and you keep repeating the 6 chapters over and over again, because there's so much in it that if you missed it the first time, you get it the second time, you get it the third time. So to look at what you've been doing and see, have you been a good person? Have you looked at things with some positivity? So I'm going to end here so that we can talk about the Parsha, and we'll pick up next week at 15.
I just want to say something. Everything that we read here, it's very realistic from life. And we talked about last week that I remember my mother keeps saying things that they sat and studied this group of people and they talk between themselves and all these things. How is all this?
I'm not sure what you're asking.
I don't ask you, just making a point that
Okay.
all these things, it's nothing new. This is life. It's a real life.
Well,
You tell to your son or your daughter, don't get friends with this one because he's not a good person.
yeah.
Everything that we read here, it's from real life.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But you know something? You can't pick up a newspaper without seeing that there are some bad parents out there. Even Jews sometimes can be bad parents. We don't like to think so. We think that's a problem of everybody else. But you read this woman whose boyfriend killed her daughter, and then she helped hide the body, the Bond baby, and there was something in the newspaper this week about a fellow who took his girlfriend's baby and bounced the basketball off of him. What kind of parenting are these people capable of? So if you don't have your parents or you to give to the next generation, if someone didn't do a very good job, this is the kind of musar, which is, to examine your life to do better. So if you say all these things are so apparent and so obvious that, but I don't know, maybe your mother said, listen, it's just as easy to fall in love with a rich guy than with a poor guy. So go only date the rich guys. And then you find, she meant well, but what happened? The more you have, more die the more problems you're going to have. So be careful what you wish for. So these are the truths that don't change whether you have a good parent or not so good parent.
Excuse me, it's from Europe. Hello?
Okay. So let's take some time to look at the Parsha.
It would be nice to have this study during the week sometime where we have more time, because there's so much going on here. There's so much, and it would be great to discuss it without the parameters of
Time
constraints.
There's so many, this is too complex actually. There's so many variables in life in general. Generation differences, age is a factor. So many factors.